This is a topic that I often have in different training sessions that we have, and I often get lots of blank stares when I talk about lots. And there very often is a question as to whether lotting or the use of lots is actually splitting or parcelling. So let's get into firstly talking about what these two things are. And I'm going to start off just talking about parceling. Sometimes it's called splitting or fractioning. And that's where you know what the full scope of the work is. You know what the contract value is, but you decide that you're going to do it in smaller portions to keep the transaction value below a certain delegation of authority, or to avoid, instead of doing a competitive bid, you try and avoid the competitive bid by doing quotations, for example. So these are the words that are typically used: parceling, splitting, fractioning. World Bank and the OECD sometimes calls it fractioning. Now, I've just got the PFMA perspective here, and this is from the instruction 2, which announced for the PFMA that the quotations threshold would move from 500,000 to R1,000,000. And you can see in the particular statement, there's a very, very strong kind of process to say you should not split. Okay. Procurement of goods and services may not be deliberately split into parts or items of a lesser transaction value in order to circumvent the prescribed procurement process. When determining transaction values, where required goods and services consist of different parts or items, said parts or items must, as far as possible, be treated as a single transaction for the purposes of determining which procurement process to follow. So that's the statement in the instruction. And I'm really just asking the question, is this actually preventing us from using this concept called lots or lotting? And a lot of it would depend on this definition of single transaction. So if we look here, treat it as a single transaction, do they mean the single transaction is a single solicitation, or is it a single contract? Now, if we look at the lesser transaction value here, this might be considered the contract value, but it's not really clear. So I'm going to leave a question mark here to say that single transaction could be single solicitation and not necessarily single contract. And if this is the case, that this particular provision is saying we should not use lotting, then please let's be sure that we address this when the regulations come out. So part of the intent behind my discussion today is to really be sure that we put this particular concept called lotting on the table, and that we account for it when the regulations for the Public Procurement Act comes out. Now, there are many examples, and this is one where Advocate Peter Volmink testified at the Zondo Commission. And this is where the Transnet Group chief executive at the time, he had a delegation of authority of 250 million rand for approving confinements. That's the word that was used. The other word that we often use is deviations or other means. But basically, the group chief executives had the authority to approve a confinement or a deviation up to 250 million rand. And what happened was that over a period of 4 days, the group chief executive approved 4 different contracts: 130 million, 239, 150, and 100 million. And all of these contracts went to McKinsey and basically said this was not right. The word that Transnet used at the time was parcelling, and this was both not ethical, and didn't say that this was unlawful at the time, because Transnet was not required to comply certainly with this particular provision, because it doesn't apply to Schedule 2s, 3Bs, or 3Ds. And of course, Transnet is a Schedule 2. But this was clearly an example of where deliberately something which could have been one contract value, 619 million, was split into four different contracts, and so that avoided the requirement of sending that 690 million rand confinement to the board subcommittee. And there are many different examples that might be a lot smaller than that 100, 600 million rand one. There might be a municipality where they know there's a single tender and it's going to be about 1 million rand throughout the year. And they deliberately split that. They split that into 200, 250, 190,000, 210,000, 150,000. And they run all of these as quotations during the year. And they do that to avoid that 1 million rand having to go through a bidding process. It might also be from a PFMA perspective. They don't want to use bid committees. And so a particular tender that would have been 1.5 million is split into three different quotation processes. And again, they do that so that they avoid going through a quotation process. I'm sure that there's nobody on this particular call today that ever does this or is aware of it. And this does not happen. This deliberate splitting does not happen. Let's just be sure that it does. Please, if you've done this, don't tell me on this particular webinar. But sometimes, and this I hear in lots of the different workshops that we have, there may be reasons to split. And some of the reasons that are often justified is, look, we've got to get this through quicker. We can't go through a long bidding process. We need to do this quickly. It's a far simpler for all concerned, for the bidders and for ourselves. There's certainly less bureaucracy in the process. We don't have to take these three quotations through the bid committee system. But also, and here we have some legitimate reasons. If we run this as a quotation, we've got a much bigger and better opportunity to, if you like, set aside. We can choose off of CSD who it is that we invite for these particular quotations. And we've certainly have a better opportunity then to achieve some of our transformation goals. And in particular, if we can split up this larger contract into smaller contracts, it would be better support for smaller businesses. And so sometimes these are the arguments that are used to say, hey, we should actually be encouraged to split because it does certainly advance our transformation goals and advance the development and the opportunities for smaller businesses. And that basically is where this concept of lots or lotting come in. And basically, lots is where a larger contract is split into divisions, but it's within the same solicitation. You still have one bid. There's one bid that goes out, but that one bid results in 4 different contracts, for example. One bid results in 4 different contracts. And that's this notion of lots or lotting. So lotting is the action of splitting that up into different lots. And very, very interesting what different countries around the world have done as far as that's concerned. This is the classic example that we're often referred to, and that's the all pay cases where SASSA issued one request for proposal, but in that one request for proposal, they said that please, if you want to submit different bids for different provinces, if you do want to work across all the different provinces that SASSA operates in, you must give us a separate bid for each of the 9 provinces. And part of the logic there was that they wanted to try and ensure that it wasn't necessarily going to be just cash pay master services or all pay that was going to get the deal, but there would be multiple smaller entities that might be able to do the disbursements of grants in their particular province, for example. And the interesting one here is that this did eventually result in just one contract, but only two companies made the functional threshold. Marsh Paul, I'll come to you shortly, made the functional threshold, and that was cash pay master services and all pay. Those were the only 2 really that were acceptable in the process. This is an example that comes out of the UK. The UK have put out just about a year ago a guideline on technical guidance on lots, and basically saying, look, we're a large organization. We require cleaning services across the country. The requirements for each site are similar in nature, but they differ. Some might not have as much window cleaning. There could be different variations. There could be different security. There could be different catering requirements or gym requirements in different sites. And so the one might be that, hey, why don't we just put out one contract? We appoint Bidvest, for example, Bidvest's cleaning services company. We appoint them to do this. We have one contract, one large supplier, and they do all the cleaning across the country. But this may be an opportunity to support small businesses. And there could be many other reasons. I'll take you through some of those shortly. And so you could choose then to say, let's divide this particular cleaning contract into lots. It could be by geographical area. There could be others, and I'll share some of those ideas with you shortly. But basically, that is saying, hang on a sec. Yes, we can. We do have an option to award this cleaning contract to one company that will do all the work across the country. But hey, cleaning is not something that necessarily you need a national entity to do. So why don't we allow smaller entities in the different regions to bid for the work? And so we will then support a lot better the goals that we might have to support small businesses in different regions. And there could be many different ways that you could decide to break the contract up into different lots. It could be geographies, as per the SASA example. It could be different business units. There could be a large national entity that has, for example, Eskom has generation. It could be different power stations, for example. There's a whole range of different ways that we can break this up. It could be different commodities or product categories. It could be different disciplines or specializations. It could be in doing systems. This is very important in agile systems development or modular system development. You could say, we don't want to just appoint Accenture. We want to appoint multiple small companies that can work on different entities. We can get this thing done a lot quicker and a lot more effectively. There could be different complexities or different volumes or capacity bands that might be there. It could be different asset types or equipment classes, different calendar windows. We're going to have, the first quarter of the year is going to be these guys. Then the next quarter is these guys. The next quarter is these guys. Different ways. There could be different project phases. We're going to have the support done by a different company to the one that does the upfront development and implementation work, because the support is not as complicated as the implementation and development work. So why don't we give a smaller business an opportunity to do that? And so there are different ways that we can do that. There's also very interesting, there's also an idea to say we can also limit the number of lots to be awarded, but we can also limit the number of lots to be contested. So we can tell bidders you can only bid for one or two, or you can say, but you can bid for them all, but we're only going to give you one, or we're going to give you a maximum of two. There are different ways that we can slice and dice this in lotting. Now, what might some of the arguments be for using lots and lotting? And these are just some. And number one is as you've heard, this really is a great way to encourage EME and QSE participation. It may in fact increase competition, because you've got, particularly if you're using different specialities or different categories, you can have more competition. It can be also a more localized competition could also be there. It certainly then will reduce concentration risk and reduce your dependency. If you've appointed one bidder to do all the work across the country, and that bidder then starts having issues, then your risk, because you've concentrated around that, might be a lot higher. It could better support your transformation goals. There's incredible opportunities. I'll share some of those with you now. When we start looking at Chapter 4 of the Public Procurement Act and how we bring Chapter 4 of the Public Procurement Act into a lotting strategy, It could mitigate performance risk. If we have one particular supplier that starts giving lots of problems in a particular area, we could perhaps bring in the other supplier from another region in and hence mitigate some of those risks. It may even encourage more innovation, because if you're focused in a lot more of a commodity area or a specific part of the solution, you might be able to apply more innovation in that. You may be able to. It might allow you to improve some of the price benchmarking comparisons. So it's certainly, we've got to recognize that costs in certain parts of our country might be different than in other parts of the country. And we can certainly, by lotting, we can certainly, take advantage of that and benefit from that. And certainly from a supplier perspective, it becomes a lot easier for them to submit bids for a specific lot. They don't now have to pull together, for example, a consortium of multiple suppliers, smaller suppliers, and they put this consortium together so that they have to submit then one tender for that national contract. It's much easier then for bidders to deal with that. So there's some of the arguments, and I'm just going to share with you now some of the considerations, and these are from my perspective, and I've certainly got some views on this one, but just to say, this is something that needs to be considered very seriously. And when I look at other jurisdictions around the world, lots and lotting is integral to their legislation. I don't see that in South Africa. I see the converse. I see a clamp down on this very powerful opportunity to use lots. So one of the questions is what value determines the procurement threshold and hence the method. So for example, can we do a single quotation where the different lots are all below the quotation level, and where we say, listen, the bidder can only bid for one lot. So if I go back to this example that we had here, perhaps we issue this as one quotation. It doesn't go through a bidding system, but it's one solicitation that results in multiple quotations. Now, does that mean that we have to now do this as a bid, or does that mean that we can actually do it as a quotation process? And hence, it might be a lot easier and quicker for us to do it. Question. What is the value that decides whether it's 80-20 or 90-10? So if we've got multiple lots, and those multiple lots add up to over 50 million, when you accumulate, you add them all up, it's over 50 million, but each of them separately is below 50 million. Does that mean it's an 80-20? And how do we then work it if we say, well, if somebody wants to actually bid for all of the lots and we allow them to do that, then it moves it over 90-10. What does that mean? There's some real questions around what that value is and how we decide that. And particularly when you start unpacking how you do the final award in a lotting system. And what about, and this is the power, what about set-asides and pre-qualification, and where we apply that? And what might that optimum ratio be? Where let's say we're going to set aside, and we've done the market research on setting aside, and we know that there are 5 suppliers out there that can do the work. We know there's 5 suppliers out there that can do the work, but we decide then that we're going to have 5 lots. Would that be the right thing? Do we have exactly 5 lots for 5 different suppliers, or do we have something else? Because on the one hand, it may not encourage competition. On the other hand, it may. I don't know. I can certainly share with you, and I don't know if there's anybody internationally who's on, maybe from the UK or from Europe, to just share with us what that is. And there's certainly some guidelines that exist there. Can you issue a single solicitation with multiple lots, and then during the process you realize, you know what, this particular lot number 2 no one is going to be able to, or no one has submitted bids for this one, or no one is going to be qualified for this one. So let's cancel that one, but we continue to award the others. Just sharing with you some of the complications of this that I think we really need to think through. And then here's a big one. Should lotting always be encouraged? And where you don't use lotting, you justify why you haven't. Other jurisdictions, in particular the UK and the EU, you've got to justify why you did not use lotting. And this is just a very interesting little graphic here that we picked up, where they've looked at all the different countries in the EU, and you can see here France, they certainly are applying, 40% of their contracts, they've applied lots to those. But here in Czechoslovakia, it's only 17% of the contracts. So very interesting. Lithuania, 9%. I don't know what SE is. Serbia, 6%. Wow, 1% here. So very, very interesting. And so, I think this is a powerful concept. And it's a powerful concept for the transformation of our supply base, but we're not thinking about it. We need to think about it a lot more. And I certainly hope that this has given you some food for thought in this whole particular process.